This is chess, but every couple of moves your pieces can evolve into stronger and better new pieces. This is the part 2 of this variant, and there are a lot more better evolutions this time. Let's start with the pawn's evolutions though. So you moved your pawn once, and now you can choose what your pawn will evolve to, Pawn Plus, which can always move 2 squares forwards not only on the first move, and it can capture pieces without moving. Or you choose the Grand Pawn, which not only both moves and takes forwards and diagonally, it also goes sideways. Alright, these are the only pawn's evolutions. I know that's not a lot, but don't worry as the knight has a ton more of them. And the first 2 are available just after 2 knight moves. The first one is called the Arabian Horse, and it only adds 4 squares to the knight movement, these right here exactly. This way it's actually going to be balanced. Okay, but there's also a second piece knight can evolve to after the first 2 moves, and it does almost the same thing as the Arabian Horse. The difference is that these 4 additional squares aren't here, but here to the diagonals. This evolution is called the Shire Horse, and I think we can go on to the next evolutions which your horsey will turn into after another 2 moves. Let's say that you chose the Arabian Horse option before, and now this piece right here is your only option. Not a bad option, I would even say it's a pretty good one honestly, and here's why. So this piece's name is the Welsh Pony, and yes, we are continuing the trend with naming these pieces with horse breeds, and when it comes to the trend of adding more rook movement to our horses, we are continuing that one either. And so this is how the movement of the Welsh Pony looks like. As you can probably tell, it covers quite a big area of the board already, but the next evolution is what makes it shine. But before that, the Danish Warmblood has to be introduced to you guys. So as you probably guessed, the Danish Warmblood is a continuation of the lower line of evolution, and again it does the same thing as the Welsh Pony. Except not orthogonally, but diagonally, meaning it's a knight movement plus 2 squares diagonally. So, as you can see, we have a clear pattern here, but we can't just add more squares orthogonally or diagonally forever. That's why this next evolution is going to add a very different movement, and it's going to be very strong, because it adds 8 squares to the piece's movement, which is kind of mind-blowing, I'm not going to lie. And cause of that, it can only be obtained after 3 more moves. Now you're probably wondering where are those 8 squares, so let me tell you that they are placed in a 3x1L from our piece. And these squares are actually added to both of the next evolutions, the Catria Horse and the Dutch Draft. Alright, now the next evolutions are available after 4 moves, and they are really powerful. Let's create the upper one first. So the Caspian Horse, as we should now call him, is on a whole another level of powerfulness when compared to his previous versions. And that's because instead of adding just a few squares to the movement, it adds a whole entire freaking rook movement to it. Because of that, the movement looks like shown here. It's getting really powerful, I have to admit, but keep in mind that you have to make 11 moves in total with a singular piece to get this abomination. So at least that's kind of balanced, right? Okay, but coming back to the lower branch of Knight's evolutions, which is more focused on the diagonal movements, the new piece there basically adds a whole bishop movement to the mix. It is called the Flemish Horse, and you guys have to admit that it looks cute as hell, doesn't it? Okay, cool. Now get ready as we're going to talk about the last and the most powerful 2 evos of the night. You gotta make 5 more moves with the previous pieces to get them, which is because they are that powerful, of course. Anyways, let me explain how they move real quick. So the Campolina Horse, which is a part of the upper line of evolution, adds a bishop movement to the mix, although not in a way you might think. And what I mean by that is that it can't capture on these squares. It can only move to them when they're empty. Okay, and as you probably guessed it, the other piece from lower evolution line does the same, just with the rook's movement. And by the way, its name is the Latvian Horse. Pretty cool, isn't he? Alright, next we have Bishop's evolutions. There are a bit more of them, and honestly I think they're a little better, so let's check them out. Okay, so after the first 2 moves, Bishop turns intro a piece from an old video of mine, the 2-colored bishop. And the reason for that piece having such a bizarre name is that it moves like a bishop, plus it can switch the square color it operates on, meaning basically just moving 1 square like a rook. It also looks pretty cool, his looks showing us it can in fact switch colors beneath it. Alrighty, but after the 2-colored bishop and 3 more moves, the evolution path splits again. This time we will talk about one of the path at a time though. Let's start with the upper path, specifically the ranged 2-colored bishop. So the ranged 2-colored bishop obviously inherits the movement from the 2-colored bishop, but it adds one difference to this movement, which is that on these 4 squares you can use a ranged attack, meaning you can capture pieces without having to move to the square it was on. Okie dokie, now let's go on to the next evolution, Bishop Bob. And by the way, just like horses got their names from the names of their breeds, bishops will simply get bishop plus some real-life name. Trust me, I wouldn't be able to come up with unique names otherwise. But anyways, this bishop evolution is actually able to jump over pieces, although it's only able to do that on some of the squares it moves to. These 12 to be specific. There's one very important thing about this jumping over pieces ability though, and it's the fact that Bishop Bob cannot capture any pieces. If he had jumped over a piece, it can only jump to empty squares. Besides that, it moves the same as the previous version of it, so let's not waste any more time on it and continue with the rest of the evolutions. Alright, next we have an evolution with a real interesting addition, an addition very similar to castling. Let me explain it real quick. Okay, but first let me explain that it is available after you've made 3 moves with the Bishop Bob. Its name is Bishop Tom, and it looks like shown here, similar to how Bob looked, just this thingy is a little different, having this circular top. And now when it comes to its movement, just like all the evolutions in this variant, it inherits the movement from the previous evolution, and obviously it adds this great addition, which just like castling allows you to swap Bishop Tom and some other piece in place. That is actually awesome, although you can only use the swap ability on a piece of your color, and it has to be the first piece Tom sees on a given diagonal. If used right, this ability can be really powerful. You can literally make double attacks with this thing, so yeah, have fun with that. Okay, after 4 more moves, we have another split in the evolutions, and you'll get to choose between Bishop Jimmy and Bishop Harry. Both of these are decent options. First, I will show you the upper one though, so say hello to Jimmy. Okay, so Jimmy also has an addition to the movement, obviously, although it's not quite as interesting. It literally just allows himself to capture pieces like a normal knight would. It cannot move to these squares though, it can just take on them. So yeah, as I said, not too exciting. Let's go on to Bishop Harry, which is not really much different from Bishop Jimmy. He just has a differently colored mace. And instead of just being able to capture on the knight movement square, it can only move to these squares. Alright, these 2 evolutions are now done. We have only 2 more before it'll be able to evolve to the mega powerful last Bishop evolution, which we'll talk about at the end of all the Bishop evolutions. And so let's create them. This is Bishop Mark. And I'm not going to beat around the bush, so let me tell you that it just adds the same thing as the previous evolution but in a 3x2L, meaning on these squares. Okay, in the parallel evolution, Bishop Noah has basically the exactly same thing to offer, except instead of taking, it's simply moving to these squares. Alright, that's it when it comes to the upper line of Bishop's evolutions. We're going to make this red Bishop last. First, let me show you these evolutions right here, first of which will cover Bishop Dan. A very similar piece to the range 2 colored Bishop, because it also grants you the ability to perform a range capture. The only thing that changes are the squares you can do it on, and for Bishop Dan they are right here. Alright, that's cool, but Bishop Dan also has one extra ability, and it's that when you make 3 moves with it, it turns into Bishop Tim, which adds something a little weird to the mixture of these different movements. And this weird thing is an orthogonal movement, although it's only for 2 squares out, plus it can jump over a piece with this movement, although just like it was with Bishop Tom, if it jumped over said piece it can't capture anymore. Alright, Bishop Tim done. And next we have Bishop Robin, the last evolution B for the evolution tree splits once again. You have to make 6 moves to get to Bishop Robin, but even though you gotta move a lot to get it, it's not like super powerful. It basically just moves like the previous Bishop plus a camel, meaning in a 3x1L in every direction. Alright guys, now it's time for these 2 evolutions, Bishop Lucas and Oliver. They are available for you after 6 moves with Bishop Robin, though that's because they are really powerful. And so let me explain. So this is Bishop Lucas, a Bishop evolution that adds something not very Bishop-like, a Rook movement. Although just like with the evolutions above it, it can only capture like a Rook, and as you probably guessed, Bishop Oliver does literally the same, but again, it doesn't take on the Rook movement squares, it just moves to them. Great, that is it when it comes to these 2 evolution. Now let's focus our attention to the final Bishop evolution, the Super Bishop. Okay, so the Super Bishop is just super powerful as the name would suggest. It also looks very powerful. But let's focus on what actually matters, which is its movement. So the way this piece moves is actually kind of complicated, and that is because it combines the movement of every single Bishop evolution we've talked about in this video. That is absolutely insane. I mean, the variety of different movements this piece is allowed to make certainly makes it one of the strongest pieces I've ever created. Because of this much power in hands of this singular piece, you gotta make 10 moves to get it, but man, it's still just mega overpowered. Okay, nice. Now these are all the Rook's evolutions. There are not as many of them, but they are definitely pretty cool, and some of them even pretty powerful, so get ready for them. Alright, first up is a piece that moves basically almost like a Chancellor, and because of that it's also called the Almost Chancellor, and his looks also represent that he moves almost like a Chancellor. But anyways, this piece moves like a Rook plus a Knight, although it cannot capture pieces on these Knight squares, which is something a normal Chancellor can do. And good news, the next evolution actually is the Chancellor, meaning it can capture on these squares, which is pretty nice. You can access the Chancellor after 4 moves with the Almost Chancellor. And now let me show you the next evolution. So this is Chancellor Plus, a better version of the normal Chancellor you can get just after 6 moves with it. And to be honest, it has a pretty powerful and tricky movement. And so let me show you this move. So obviously it inherits all of the movement from the previous evolution, although of course it has to add a thing or two to this movement. And it actually adds something real cool, a double Knight movement. And for clarity, double Knight moves like a Knight, but twice in each direction. Alright, nice. The first evolution of the middle branch is the Jumping Rook. As you can see, it has a spring underneath it which definitely helps it with jumping. But wait, what's up with this jumping thingy? Well, as you could probably tell, this piece can jump above some pieces, although it can't just jump over however many pieces you want it to. It can only jump above one piece, and also if it jumped, it cannot capture any pieces. Oh, and obviously it can only jump to its normal movement squares, just so you guys know. Okay, that is pretty much the only change in its movement. Time for the next piece now. Meet the Jumping Rook 2. Okay guys, I know it's not the most creative name, but this piece is really similar to its previous version, so it seemed kind of fitting to name it this way. When it comes to its looks, it isn't much different either. I mean, it only adds one more spring compared to the normal Jumping Rook. But let's go on to what actually matters, which is the movement of this piece. Okay, so the movement of Jumping Rook 2 is very similar to the previous piece's movement. I know, what a surprise. Anyways, it can jump over one piece too and all that, except it captures the piece it jump over. Only if it's your opponent's piece, of course. That is actually insane. Therefore, you'll have to change Jumping Rook's location 6 times before you get this thingy. Okay, these pieces were pretty powerful, I gotta say. Although they don't even compare to these next 2 evolutions, which are called Jumping Master Rooks, and you'll see in a moment how much they have mastered jumping. So this is the first Jumping Master Rook, and it doesn't modify the movement very drastically. It's rather a small change, although it makes this piece way stronger compared to the previous one. But anyways, let me finally talk about this change, because you're probably curious. Okay, so you know how the Jumping Rook introduced hopping over pieces, but it could only be done above one piece. Well, the piece we're talking about right now changes that, as it can now hop above 2 pieces at once. And I know that it may not seem huge or anything, but it can literally jump over this thing right here, and attack another piece. That's pretty massive if you ask me. This evolution is available after 6 moves with Jumping Rook 2, and now let's create the last evolution in this branch, the Jumping Master Rook 2. Okay, so this piece doesn't actually change much, it just adds another spring. I'm just kidding, of course, it adds only the spring, but that's only if we consider its looks. If we take a look at its movement, things look a little bit different, to say the least. That's because Jumping Master Rook 2 captures pieces that it jumped over, which was not possible with the previous piece, which only takes pieces it jumped over if it was one singular piece. If it would have jumped above 2 pieces, they just stay on the board. Nice. The next Evo is in another branch, and you might have noticed something weird with this branch. There's only one piece in it, although don't worry, that's not a mistake. This is like that because this particular evolution is kind of specific. Let me explain. Okay. So this piece is called the Life Rook, and that is because every 7 moves it gets an additional life, and this life, as you have probably guessed, makes it so that if this piece gets taken, it doesn't go off the board, but instead it respawns on the first free square from a corner on your side of the board. That is pretty insane in my opinion, although you unfortunately cannot make this piece invisible because there is a cap on how many lives you can get in total, and this cap is 4 lives. Great, that's it when it comes to this piece. Let's go on to the Queen's evolutions now. Prepare for some very powerful pieces, some that move to nearly every square around it or even have the ability to spawn other pieces. Although let's start slow at the beginning with the first 3 evolutions. So these are the 3 evolutions we're talking about at the moment. Your queen can evolve into one of them after 6 moves with it, and this is the first one of them, the Camely Queen. So the Camely Queen, as the name and its look suggest, is a combination of the camel, which I think we've talked about in this video, and the queen, which you guys probably already know how moves. This gives us this movement right here in result, and honestly it is already way too powerful. But anyways, let's go on to the next piece below the Camely Queen, the Amazon. Okay, I know you've probably already heard about this piece quite a lot. I had to add it here because it's just such a classic. But anyways, if you don't know this piece, just like Camely Queen, it moves like a combination of 2 other pieces. This time it's Queen plus Knight, giving us this movement right here. Its appearance is also a combination of these 2 pieces, by the way, which is quite nice. These 2 options were pretty normal and not really that exciting. And that's why this third one is going to the very original and completely different from the other 2. Meet the Queen. Wait, what? Why is there a normal queen here? What's happening here? Well guys, this time you can actually choose to skip the evolution and just stay as a queen, which might seem like a complete nonsense, but this decision comes with a reward as the evolutions later down the line are very, very powerful, although we'll talk about them later. First, let's talk about a piece that is attainable with both Amazon and the Camely Queen, and it's really strong, so stay tuned. We've already talked about this piece in an old video of mine, but it just felt like the most natural continuation of the 2 previous evolutions, so I had to use it. The piece I'm talking about here is the Mega Queen. As you can see, it looks like a weirdly drawn queen, plus a knight and a camel, and that's also exactly how it moves, and so it's sort of just combining the 2 previous evolutions in a way. Alright, nice. We have one more piece in the upper branch, so let's talk about it before we jump to these very powerful evolutions over here. So this piece is named the Double Knight Camely Queen. I know this is the most complicated name in this channel's history. Its appearance is just 3 pieces slammed into one square, but regarding its movement, it moves just like the previous piece, except instead of moving once like a knight, it moves like it twice, like shown here. That's great. Now we can go talk about the lower branch, which contains the 2 powerful pieces I mentioned earlier. Let's begin. Okay, so these two pieces actually utilize a special ability I invented just for the two of them, and that ability is summoning other pieces. The first piece uses this ability to summon pawns, and as you can see it has a wand which helps him with that. It's named the Summoner Queen, and you're probably wondering where does it spawn these pawns, and the answer to that question is all around itself, like this. This ability would be very powerful by itself, although what makes it even better is the fact the pawns that you spawn in can evolve into their evolutions too, which is just insane. Although to make it a bit more balanced I introduced a limit of pawns you can summon, and that limit is 7. Alright, great, next we have pretty much the same deal, except better, as this time our piece can summon knights. The piece itself is called Knight Summoner Queen. It can summon knights on the squares the knight would move to. The knights that you spawn can evolve too, although you can only summon a maximum of 2 knights, so it isn't that overpowered. One more thing you need to know is that the Knight Summoner Queen doesn't lose the ability to spawn pawns. It can spawn the rest of the pawns you could spawn with the Summoner Queen, and on the same squares. Great, but now the last set of evolutions is waiting for us, so let's talk about it. So the first king's evolution is called the Strong King, and honestly it isn't really that strong when compared to all the other evolutions in this video. Although compared to the king standards it looks a little better. Just look at what it can do. It allows you to capture pieces 2 squares diagonally from it. That's awesome. It may not seem like it is that awesome, but it can now flee from checkmate by capturing a further away piece, so it is pretty cool, although these evolutions get even stronger now, especially with the stronger king. Okay, so now we've got an even stronger king in our hands, and to be honest it isn't much different from the previous one, because it literally just adds taking pieces 2 squares away orthogonally instead of diagonally, and that's it. Next is a pretty decent king as well, which again doesn't add anything crazy, but still quite significant. Meet the Strongerer King. This is what it looks like. Quite a strong look, I'm not gonna lie, but alright, let me show you its movement. So this is the entire movement of the previous piece, and what this piece changes here is it takes these only capture squares, and it adds ranged attack to it. This adds a lot of power to the Strongerer King, and sure is pretty useful. Let's create the next evolution though, the Swapper King. Okay, so this right here is the so-called Swapper King. As the name suggests, it can now swap itself with another piece, just like Bishop Tom we've talked about earlier. Although while Bishop Tom could swap any piece on all these squares, our Swapper King can only do that on these squares. Nothing to worry about though. As this next evolution expands the swapping range, it's not a very big expansion, but it's something right. Okay, the exact squares the swap ability is expanded to are here, and as I told you it's not a lot, but anyways guys, that's it with the King's evolutions. Also, this whole evolution variant is done now. You can play it on my website, and also all the pieces from this video are available in the position editor. You can access them through my Patreon. Anyways, I see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.